I'm Chris Lipsey in Tel Aviv.
And I'm Errol Barnett here in New York. Today marks 1 year since the deadliest massacre in Israel's history, when Hamas launched a surprise attack, killing 1,200 people, taking more than 250 hostage. Around 100 of those hostages remain in Hamas captivity right now, and their families aren't backing down. They continue to demand their loved ones be released. And around the world, this somber day is being marked with many memorial events, as well as pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli protests and rallies. We have a special show for you today as we cover events in Israel and all around the world, remembering the lives lost and those taken hostage on October 7th, and marking the start of the Israel-Hamas war. I want to send it back to our Chris Livesay in Yarkon Park in Tel Aviv. It's a sobering day, Chris.
That's right, Errol. As you said, I'm here in Yarkon Park in Tel Aviv, where we're remembering that horrific day 1 year ago. You can see this massive stage they've set up behind me, and you can also hear some of the sound tests that they're performing, getting ready for a big event they're going to have later on today, where we're going to hear from some survivors. We're going to hear from family members. We're going to hear from victims of those who were killed on that day. You might be able to make out some of the vehicles behind me on the stage as well. Those were recovered from the Nova Music Festival, where hundreds of people were gunned down by Hamas gunmen. Now, something very poignant to point out about this event where I am right now is that it was organized by the families and not by the government, and that was very, very specific. The families and volunteers wanted to draw a distinction between the government that many of them blame for allowing the events, those horrific events of October 7th, to have happened in the first place. Remember, this was on the watch of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and they blame him for this massive, this historic security breach, this intelligence breach, and by their lights, a massive leadership breach as well. But we start with a look back at that fateful morning on October 7th and the terrible events that unfolded in its wake. Our Elizabeth Palmer reports.
Good morning. This is Kibbutz Be'eri, about 3 miles from Gaza. And reminders of the massacre are everywhere, like the burned out house you can see behind me. It's where Hamas murdered Yuval Haran's father and kidnapped his mother and 6 other members of the family. It's just one of the traumatic stories that Israelis are reliving today, a year after the October 7th attack. The attack began with Hamas terrorists shooting their way out of Gaza, past Israeli border security, to launch a pitiless attack on young people attending a music festival. It was chaos, a killing spree and mass kidnapping there and on nearby kibbutzim, where 101 people were murdered, some burned alive in their homes, and even babies abducted. Israel's response was immediate. It bombed Gaza, then sent in ground forces. The mission? To destroy Hamas and rescue the hostages. A year later, neither has been accomplished. 97 hostages taken on October 7th are presumed still to be in Gaza, along with 2 million Palestinians trapped in a sliver of land the Israeli military bombs every day. The target, they say, is Hamas. The collateral damage can be anyone else, no matter how small. As for the physical destruction, on a recent visit to southern Gaza with the military, we saw nothing but ruins. Recent polling data shows a slim majority of Israelis want the war in Gaza to end in a deal to bring the hostages home. Easier said than done. Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, in hiding, is stalling on a deal and vowing to fight on.
We will win.
And millions of Israelis believe Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his ultra-right allies are stalling too.
We say that our government are full of excuse my language, and they do nothing. Our Prime Minister is a liar.
Over the past month, Israel's government has led the country into a bigger, riskier war. Most of the hostages' families fear that could mean a death sentence for their loved ones. As one speaker said at a memorial we attended this morning, we all know this war has to end in a deal. It's just a question of how many lives will be lost in the meantime. Elizabeth Palmer, CBS News, Kibbutz Be'eri, Israel.
Elizabeth Palmer there with a retrospective 1 year on. Hamas took more than 250 people captive on October 7th. Nearly half have since been released or rescued. Again, Liz Palmer with the harrowing story of one woman who survived more than 7 weeks in Hamas captivity.
You're sitting there as dawn breaks. What was the first concrete sign that something was terribly wrong?
Well, 6 a.m. was one beautiful sunrise, one very peaceful moment that everybody remembers. Everybody speaks about that moment. And then 29 minutes later, 2 rockets in the sky. Eventually, after hearing gunshots above my head and seeing them touching ground already, and that put me in a point that, okay, something is happening. And after 5 hours of running, they found us happy, cheering, screaming Allahu Akbar.
And what did he do?
He was standing with an iron pipe above my head about to beat me. I pretended to be an Arab, and I was using my 5-6 words in Arabic.
And did that stop him?
I was using tons of manipulation. I was pretending to be fainting and see me weak. I can't do anything against you. I'll give you whatever you want, whatever I have on me, but please don't kill me. And then they took a video of me and posted it in TikTok.
Of you on the ground,
Yeah.
basically begging for your
Yeah,
life. And
exactly.
they posted it on TikTok.
Yeah. And that's how my parents found out that I was kidnapped.
Later this hour, we'll have more from Elizabeth Palmer and that hostage who came home. Hamas still holds about 100 hostages, including 4 Americans. About half the hostages are believed to be dead, like Idan Shtivi. Hamas announced this morning he was killed at the Nova Festival, and they're still holding his body. For most of the past year, Israelis have taken to the streets to pressure Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to secure a deal with Hamas to release them. I spoke to protesters at a demonstration this weekend. For most of the past year, thousands and thousands of people have been turning out here to protest for the release of the hostages. Of the 250 that were originally taken on October 7, more than 100 still remain in Hamas captivity. Some are dead, some are alive. We don't know exactly how many. And the people out here, most of them blame the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for not doing enough to bring them home. But also, of course, the terrorist organization Hamas for taking them hostage to begin with. And this is actually a small gathering compared to the ones we've seen in recent months where there were hundreds of thousands of people coming out. However, there have been recent government restrictions on group gatherings because of the Iranian missiles that have been launched at Israel in the past week, not to mention the new front that's opened up in the war with Lebanon. So people are coming out right now as much as they can, not knowing if they're going to come out again to celebrate the memorial itself. You can see there's really all walks of life here, men, women, children, young, old, rich, poor. The one thing that draws them all together is that shared sense of anguish they feel for the hostages who are still being held in Hamas captivity. In fact, they tell me that for them, October 7th never ended. And what brings you out here tonight?
I actually come here I don't know, 3 times a week, maybe 4. There's no other way. We've got to be here for the families, for the hostages, for Israel. This is my country, my people. It could have been my dad or my daughter, you know, so you gotta come here. You gotta be here every night or, you know, whenever you can.
I'm the son of Yocheved Lifshitz and Oded Lifshitz. My mother released after 17 days, and my father is still in hostage in Gaza.
Did you ever imagine you would still be here a year later?
No, but Yes and no. Both sides perhaps don't want this deal.
You've been doing this for a year. I mean, does that ever feel hopeless?
You know, it's very, very difficult to make it.
When you get your family back?
I hope so.
Do you think that you'll be able to recover from this horrific event?
I don't think so. I will always remember what happened over here on the 7th of October.
Now, some posters you saw at that rally showed a man named Or Levy who was taken hostage during the Nova Music Festival, where Hamas gunned down hundreds of people. I sat down with his brother, Michael Levy, and I asked him how his family is coping 1 year on. And a warning, some viewers may find this report distressing.
My mom called me crying. She said that she spoke to Or and he just repeated the sentence, "Mom, you don't want to know what's going on here." Apparently it was inside a bomb shelter. They ran into it because of the missile attack. And even then I wasn't too worried because in my mind it was just a missile attack.
So they ran into the shelter for safety.
Exactly. And apparently this shelter became a death trap.
A death trap.
A few minutes after that call, a group of terrorists arrived. They sprayed it with bullets, they threw grenades inside, they even fired an RPG into it.
What happened to his wife?
Inav was killed from one of the grenades that exploded inside.
His wife was killed?
Yeah.
And they have a son.
They have a son, Almog. He just turned 3 last June. We tried to throw him a birthday to make him feel like a normal kid. He was happy. But for me, for us, it was the saddest birthday I've ever been to. You know, just looking at him and knowing that he won't see his mother anymore, you know, celebrating a birthday with no parents. That's something that no kid in the world should suffer. On the second day, on October 9th, I promised my parents I'll bring him back. I don't know why and how I got the nerve to promise such a thing. Honestly, I still don't know how I'm going to do it. But I promised them, and then I promised myself, and I promised Almog I'll bring his father back, and I intend to keep that promise, and this is why I wake up every morning and keep going.
Did you ever imagine you'd be here a year later?
No.
How did October 7th change Israel?
I think the best example is something that my 7-year-old daughter said a month ago to my wife. She asked her that if she hears a siren or if she sees a missile attack, she won't get into a safe room. She won't get into a car. She asked her to promise her to keep running, to run away from it. And I think it described what we all feel. We do not feel safe in our own country. I want my girls to live in peace and grow up in peace. That's the dream. I believe it can happen, but we'll have to work hard to get it.
Michael Levy also told me that in order for his entire country just to begin the healing process, all of the hostages need to come home. Turning now to the White House, where President Biden is remembering this day, our Weijia Jiang is there.
Chris, in a new statement marking the one-year anniversary of the October 7th attacks, President Biden spoke about the more than 1,200 people who lost their lives, mourning them. That includes 46 Americans. And he recalled how he was the first American president to ever visit Israel during a wartime, stressing the U.S.'s commitment to supporting Israel as it defends itself, not only from Hamas, but the president also mentioned other militant groups and Iran, which of course is really relevant right now as the tensions continue to escalate in that region. President Biden says that every day he thinks about the hostages and their family, and pointed out that his administration continues to try to broker a ceasefire deal that includes the return of hostages. But Chris, he also talked about the Palestinian suffering and said that there have been far too many civilian deaths as a result of this conflict. He spoke about the U.S. humanitarian aid and his commitment to continue to providing that and helping the people in Gaza as much as possible. Later this morning, Chris, in the Blue Room here at the White House, which is not used that often, he will be joined by the First Lady alongside a rabbi for a candle lighting ceremony to also commemorate this 1-year anniversary, which he calls a solemn. So, Chris, this is a dark day that the president is taking head on. And I should say that the vice president also issued a statement with condolences for those who lost their lives, and again, a recommitment for U.S. to continue supporting Israel. Chris.
Weijia Jiang, thank you. Coming up, we'll have more special coverage of October 7th, a year later, including more from our interview with a woman who survived weeks in Hamas captivity. But first, there's domestic news ahead. Errol?
All right, Chris, thank you. Really comprehensive coverage there. Back here in the U.S., we are watching Hurricane Milton, which moments ago just became a major Category 4 storm and is churning toward Florida's west coast. This is dangerous, could be catastrophic. Who needs to be on alert right now, and how Floridians are preparing for this storm while still picking up the pieces from Hurricane Helene? Stay right there. All right, we have a breaking update for you on Hurricane Milton. It just strengthened to a Category 4 storm along Florida's Gulf Coast. That means it could bring with it catastrophic damage, according to the Weather Service. If it hits at this strength, the area it comes in contact with may be uninhabitable for weeks. And of course, this is happening after the wrath of Helene less than 2 weeks ago. Hurricane Milton expected to make landfall Wednesday. Tampa Airport already suspending flights starting tomorrow morning. And this morning, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said emergency services are actually trying to ramp up as they complete cleanup efforts from Helene. He says that's critical before Milton arrives.
We had a lot of debris left from Hurricane Helene on Florida's Gulf Coast. That creates a huge hazard if you have a major hurricane hit in that area this week.
CBS News correspondent Christian Benavidez joins us from Tampa, Florida. Pressure mounting, Chris, to speed up the clean effort after Helene. But how is that possible since folks are already doing as much as they can?
Errol, it is just so absolutely challenging, and I want to give you a sense of how folks here in the Tampa Bay area are preparing. We're in St. Petersburg, and take a look at the line. We've got folks here that are waiting to pick up sandbags. I spoke to one man who said that he was in line for about 2 hours before getting to this point where he was able to actually grab some sandbags. He's in a Zone A evacuation zone, and they're already being told that they're likely to be evacuated. In fact, the evacuations here could reach up to Zone C. At this point, people are just sort of preparing for what could potentially happen. Keep this in mind that the Tampa Bay area has not had a major hurricane make a direct landfall since 1921. That's over 100 years ago, so it's truly something that would be untested for this area. Just around the corner from here, about 10 minutes away, we were in a neighborhood that was just that had about 6 feet of storm surge. 80% of the homes there were flooded, and people's belongings are just out on the street. There is so much concern, of course, about that debris as well, the potential for that debris to go flying and for it to clog up the storm drains as Hurricane Milton is barreling this way.
Christian, I'm hopeful that viewers there are heeding your advice and the advice from officials to get to a safe place, but we don't want to frighten people, but this is a serious storm on the way. Christian Benavidez, thanks so much. You and the crew stay safe. We now want to bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the first look at the national weather forecast. This is serious, Grant.
Errol, I'll tell you what, you talk about worst case scenarios, and this is one of them. But when you talk about the fact that you had another catastrophic hurricane just about a week and a half ago, it truly is a really tough situation to wrap your mind around. Like Christiane was just talking about there, you've got a rapidly intensifying hurricane. It was a Category 1 hurricane earlier on this morning. It's now a 150-mile-per-hour Category 4 hurricane. It's still tracking to the southeast, but it will start that turn to the northeast as we go throughout the day today. And it's at that point that we're really going to have to watch it closely. It could become a Category 5 hurricane. However, the damage will already be done in terms of the surge. Even though we're looking at potentially weakening as it approaches the west coast of Florida as we go through Wednesday into Thursday, all of that water that's going to be pushed out ahead of it that produces that significant surge concern for the Tampa Bay area will already be going in that direction, even though the wind speeds will be weakening, which, yes, is a silver lining, but certainly the surge threat is the most immediate threat along the coast. Tropical storm force winds are expected to begin to arrive along the Florida Gulf Coast sometime through mid-morning tomorrow, and then everything needs to be really battened down tightly because that's when the winds will begin to get so strong that they can't do anything else to prepare. Surge, as I mentioned, a significant concern, Errol, up to 12 feet in some places. We don't have it pinned down exactly where that center of the storm is going to track, but still, everybody across the Gulf Coast of Florida needs to watch this storm very carefully. Back to you.
Yeah, keep their eyes and ears open and listen to these reports. Grant, thank you very much. We'll see you again soon. Still coming up for everyone, we will return to Israel, marking 1 year since the Hamas terror attack. With no clear end in sight to fighting in Gaza, there are emerging stories of hope from both Israelis and Palestinians. We will bring you those powerful stories next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. We are continuing our special coverage from Israel as the country marks a full year since Hamas launched a surprise attack. Around 1,200 people were killed, hundreds more kidnapped, many of whom still remain in captivity. And here you're seeing images from around the world as the day is being marked with memorial events, rallies and protests as people gather to remember those killed while calling for an end to the conflict in Gaza and a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. I'm Errol Barnett in New York. I want to send it back, though, to Chris Livesay in Tel Aviv. It's hard to imagine, Chris, but there are some aspects of hope at this time as well.
That's right, Errol, and I just want to remind you that I'm at one of those memorial events where you can hear them warming up for the events that are about to begin. A year on from those October 7th attacks, our Elizabeth Palmer brings us a rare interview with a hostage who came home. Moran Steliyanai was at the Nova Music Festival when Hamas gunmen spared her life, but not her freedom.
Moran remembers the beautiful sunrise on October 7th. Just before Hamas terrorists stormed the music festival and she was caught.
He was standing with an iron pipe above my head about to beat me. So I was pretending to be fainting and see me weak. I'll give you whatever you want, whatever I have on me, but please don't kill me. And then they took a video of me and posted it in TikTok.
Of you on the ground,
yeah,
basically begging for your life. And they posted it on TikTok.
Yeah. And that's how my parents found out that I was kidnapped.
She was held in Gaza, which by then was a war zone.
I'm half deaf now. I lost half of my hearings because of the explosions and the bombings that we were exposed to every single day.
In densely packed Gaza, Moran was moved from house to house. She was beaten, had a broken leg, and lice. In 54 days, she was allowed to shower 4 times. But the real torment was fear.
The worst moment is that a thought come into your head that says, you know what, maybe they should rape me already and then I will not be fear anymore.
Almost like bring on the worst.
Yeah.
Because it was
just do it.
Just terrible to be fearful all the time.
Every single day. I was not raped and I was not murdered. But in my head, they killed me every single day. And in my head, they raped me every single day.
She was violated, though.
They searched you.
Yeah.
And it was very invasive.
Yeah. And it happened more than once.
Moran resolved to do whatever she had to stay alive, including play cards with her captors.
So you had to pretend to be their friend.
Just
Or
not
at least
really a friend, because they hated me. They used to laugh at me every day. They pointed a gun to my head and threatened me every single day.
In November, there was a ceasefire. Palestinian prisoners were released from Israeli jails, and Hamas let 105 hostages go in batches over 7 days. Moran thought she'd be among the first.
They took us from the house, 3 people, me and 2 girls. And then on the last second, he whispered in my ear, "Not you, not now." And he pulled me back by my shirt.
that must have been crushing.
It was crushing.
She had to wait another 5 days, and to ward off despair, escaped into fantasy.
When I was eating, and even if it was just 5 spoons of rice, then I pictured, a full plate. What was more easier to picture is how it feels to hug my mother.
So what was it like when it finally was real?
Exactly the same. She sounded the same. She even dressed the same as I pictured them in my head. So for me, that was the biggest dream coming true, I got to see my family. And I had that miracle.
Elizabeth Palmer there with that powerful report. Hamas has been dramatically reduced as a fighting force since it launched the October 7th attacks, but there's still no clear end in sight for the war in Gaza, now entering its 2nd year. Our Elizabeth Palmer has also spoken to some Israelis and Palestinians about their hopes for peace and the long-awaited day after.
Israel's campaign to eliminate Hamas is entering year 2. The bombing continues night and day, and Gaza lies in ruins. But all wars end eventually, and even here, the day after will dawn.
Where do we go from here?
The problem is that all the time Israel's looking for a military solution to what is essentially a political issue.
Diana Bhutto is a Palestinian lawyer and activist.
How do you get from these dark times, as you put it, to a functioning country that serves both Israelis and Palestinians as equals?
It's to first recognize that there is a system that's in place, a system of privilege that has served to one and not the other. And I think Israelis are increasingly seeing that.
They may see it, but right now the majority don't trust the Palestinians or their leaders enough to back any kind of joint plan for peace. Some, though, still do. Gil Dickman's cousin Carmel was kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th. She was murdered, and so was her mother.
Life has to win.
He believes there's no alternative to a shared future with the Palestinians.
And people on both sides of the border, I still believe that. Believe in life and believe that we can still live together here. That must be the solution. It might not happen in the next few months. It's going to take time. Even if we sign a deal, we got the hostages back, it's going to take time to build this again. The belief in the human spirit, but that's what we believe here. That's what the people who were hurt the most on October 7th believe here in Israel.
General Israel Ziv, who once commanded Israel's forces in Gaza, says Israel's future has to include a separate and independent home for the Palestinians.
Do you still believe in a two-state solution?
I think that the two-state solution is the only way for Israel to exist. Because in the end of the day, if it will be one state between the river and the sea, it will be, in the end of it, an Arab state. And we, as a Jewish dominant country, will vanish. Without two-state solutions, I don't see any future for the state of Israel in the Middle East.
On the anniversary of the massacre, with all the pain that inflicted and the bloodshed it unleashed, wise heads continue to hope and devise peace plans.
When we see the destruction, it's not just buildings that need to be rebuilt, it's lives, it's people. And that's going to require a lot of hands.
Israel's government is now leading the country into a bigger, wider war. Even so, there will be a day after, just not tomorrow or anytime soon. Elizabeth Palmer, CBS News, Tel Aviv.
That final report there from Elizabeth Palmer. Now, we've heard a lot from how October 7th forever changed the people and the victims who live here in Israel and in Gaza, about how it's changing the geopolitics of the Middle East, sparking a war not just with Hamas in Gaza, but now also with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Last week, Iran, which funds both of those U.S.-designated terrorist groups, fired more than 180 ballistic missiles on Israel. We're now waiting for Israel to retaliate. After a year of covering the events and aftermath of October 7th, I can tell you that we at CBS News are also forever changed, but none more than those of our colleagues who are from the region. They are the linchpin of all of our reporting, but they rarely get recognition and they never get a break. Their tireless work, sacrifice, and compassion are a testament to the immense decency that exists among the people stuck in this conflict. Tomorrow we'll have another special focusing on Gaza and Israel's response there. This has been a special coverage of 1 year since October 7th. Thank you for watching. Now, back to Errol.
Chris, I emphatically second everything you said there about the people in the region completely changed, including those of you there who have been covering this story. I appreciate your coverage today, and of course, we'll be back with you tomorrow. Coming up for our viewers right now, Vice President Harris sits down with 60 Minutes. We'll have a preview of this interview next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. So tonight, an interview with Vice President Harris will air during an election special of 60 Minutes. She spoke with Bill Whitaker about her economic plan for Americans. Here's a quick preview.
It is not right that teachers and nurses and firefighters are paying a higher tax rate than billionaires and the biggest corporations. And I plan on making that fair.
But we're dealing with the real world here.
But the real world includes...
How are you going to get this through Congress?
You know, when you talk quietly with a lot of folks in Congress, they know exactly what I'm talking about because their constituents know exactly what I'm talking about. Their constituents are those firefighters and teachers and nurses.
For more on this, let's bring in CBS News campaign reporter Aaron Navarro. What's great about 60 Minutes, Aaron, is that Bill Whitaker gets the follow-up question and keeps pressing for specifics from these candidates, does not let them just speak about their talking points. What more should we expect from this interview?
Errol, good to be with you. Yeah, since Harris has become the candidate, this may be among her more tougher editorially interviews she's done as the Democratic nominee. You played that clip when it comes to the economy, and that's the question at the core of her plan is how will it actually be paid for? She seemed to signal confidence that she could get Congress to bend to her will and essentially pass a corporate tax rate raise. But Whitaker also pressed Harris on whether the U.S. still has influence over Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and pressing if, you know, the talks for a ceasefire seem to be stalled, if America still has sway over the foreign leader. Harris said that diplomacy is an ongoing pursuit, quote, and said the alliance between the Israeli and American people is maybe more important than specifically dealing with Netanyahu. But certainly going to be watching tonight. We know that part of it's going to be about Harris and part of it will be about Trump, who did decline the interview with 60 Minutes.
And what's interesting about the timing, Aaron, is like we can just check the calendar. We're less than a month away from Election Day. More than 1 million Americans have already voted as part of early voting in some states. So what is behind this Harris strategy to show up everywhere? She was trending on a popular podcast, I think, just over the weekend, and she's doing a lot of daytime TV as well.
They believe that this is a way to reach undecided voters in their audiences. She's going to be on The View tomorrow, Colbert, Howard Stern, all during her trip in New York. And as you mentioned, the Call Her Daddy podcast appearance, hoping to cater to the audience of younger women.
Got to see that Howard Stern interview, one of the best interviewers that exists. Aaron Navarro, thanks so much for joining us from our D.C. bureau. A quick reminder, you can catch the full interview with Vice President Harris tonight on 60 Minutes. That is on CBS at 8 p.m. Eastern. Former President Donald Trump returned to Butler, Pennsylvania. Remember, this was the site of the first assassination attempt against him. And while there, he spoke to his supporters about the attack.
12 weeks ago, we all took a bullet for America, and all we are all asking is that everyone goes out and votes. And all of this will be for nothing if you don't get out and vote.
CBS News campaign reporter Olivia Rinaldi was there during the first assassination attempt. You returned to cover this rally, which I know is emotional and difficult for you and the team. You've written about that on CBSNews.com. But for our viewers watching, explain the atmosphere, the difference in atmosphere, I guess, on President Trump's return to Butler.
Yeah, good to be with you, Errol. The atmosphere change was palpable. It was a lot more solemn. There were sections of the pre-program that honored Corey Comparator, who's the firefighter who passed away during the first assassination attempt. He was shot and ultimately passed away after that. So it certainly had a solemn feel to it. And Donald Trump's return was meant to be triumphant, but certainly you could feel the heaviness in the air around it. There was a certain gravity to the moment of Trump returning. And that was the point that the campaign was trying to make. This was a crowning achievement, a crowning rally that they were trying to hold that day. It was one of the larger crowds that I've seen Trump have at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, the second time around. Certainly had a moment to it, a amount of heaviness to returning to Butler.
Folks should head to our website to see your reflections on that day. I want to quickly drill down on some specifics when it comes to the ballooning deficit. Most Americans say that concerns them because there's a new report from the nonpartisan nonprofit Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, and it found that both candidates' plans would add to the national debt, but Trump's would add $4 trillion more than Harris. Would you know which parts of his agenda are proving to be the most costly?
Yeah, this was just released from that committee. You mentioned both would raise the debt and the deficit. Harris's plan would increase the debt, they estimate, by $3.5 trillion under some conservative or center estimates. Trump's would increase by about $7.5 trillion. Now, both of their highest costs in both of their plans would actually be the extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Now, that's the tax code that was approved by Congress under Trump's first administration back in 2017. Those are expiring in 2025. That's why you're hearing a lot about tax policy during this campaign. So important to note that that's actually what would increase the most under both campaigns. But there were a few other things that were of interest that I noted. Some of the highest costs from Harris's plan would be, increasing or rather, both of these campaigns have proposed exempting tax on tips and tax on overtime from the Trump campaign. Those would also increase the deficit by a couple $100 billion. So a lot to really dig in here on this report. We're also learning that Harris's plan to increase the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28% would raise revenue. So a lot to really dig in here about how these specific policies could impact Americans and impact the country's economy and well-being overall.
Yeah, and a good reminder that everything the candidates promise costs something, always worth asking how they intend to pay for it. Olivia Rinaldi, thank you so much. Now, you may not realize this, but a new Supreme Court begins today, and there are several high-profile cases on the docket. They're being closely watched around the country. We're going to break them down next here on CBS News 24/7. It is the first Monday in October. That means the return of the U.S. Supreme Court for its new session. Among some of the high-profile cases under consideration will be the regulation of ghost guns. These are guns made from kits that cannot be traced. The court will also take up the controversial concept of medical transition treatment for transgender children. Let's bring in CBS News Chief Legal Correspondent Jan Crawford for more on all of this. Jan, I would think that for every Supreme Court case, there are high stakes that are relevant to all of us, but specifically with these cases, what are the central arguments at issue?
Well, Errol, I mean, today kind of has that first day of school feel to it, right? The court's back on the bench, as you said, first Monday in October after a summer off, and they are just going to jump right into things with the first case you mentioned on ghost guns. They'll have arguments tomorrow on that case. And at issue, as you explained, these kind of do-it-yourself guns. You can order them on the internet in kits and then put them together at home. And police say that those guns, which don't have serial numbers, are leading to an increase in crime among minors and criminals because you don't have to show any ID to get them. You can just go on the internet, click a box that says you're 21 and not a criminal, no checks done at all, and they get sent to your home or wherever you can receive them. Now, the industry says, so wait a minute, be that as it may, whatever, the ATF doesn't have the authority to regulate these guns under these old existing firearms laws, that's something that that Congress has to do. And so far, Congress has failed to act on that. Now, the other huge case that's going to get a lot of attention that you mentioned, that one's on the horizon. I think we'll probably have arguments in that one in December. And that is a look at state laws that are banning hormone treatments, puberty blockers for young people, minors, who are experiencing gender dysphoria. Tennessee and about 24 other states now have passed these laws restricting those kind of treatments for minors. And then other states on the other side have passed laws saying they will allow those treatments. So there's this big divide across the country nationwide on this issue. The court is going to weigh in. The Biden administration has sued to block the laws that restrict this kind of treatment. They're siding with the states that would allow it. The states are led by Tennessee, and they're saying these are novel treatments that states should be able to protect minors, as they put it, as they choose. Again, that's going to be a very controversial case in what I think is shaping up to be another controversial term, Errol. There are a ton of other cases that they have set for argument or will soon schedule for argument that touch on a range of hot-button issues, including the use of deadly force by police, laws to protect minors, on and on. It's going to be a big one, so buckle your seatbelt, I guess.
Well, I know your seatbelt is always buckled when it comes to the Supreme Court. How might ethics concerns cloud or weigh the justices this term? Because we're heading to what could be a split election. It's a coin flip right now. 24 years ago, the Supreme Court decided the election between Bush and Gore. How much is that suspicion clouding the court these days?
You know, I think that internally at the court, it's not going to have any impact whatsoever. Externally, you're going to see the critics of the Supreme Court beat the drum that this court is violating ethics rules, that they're corrupt. But again, those are partisan attacks on the Supreme Court because they don't like some of the decisions that the court has reached. Some of the ethics concerns that they have raised don't necessarily involve anyone that's had business before the Supreme Court, so they can't really point to any conflicts among the justices. But it is an issue, and you are going to hear about it.
Seatbelts buckled. Airbags ready to be deployed. Jan Crawford at the standby.
Let's hope we don't have a crash. No crashes.
No, I know it. But if so, you'll be here to explain it. Jan, thanks so much. Great to see you.
Thanks, Errol.
Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with a look at the national forecast. Grant?
All right, Errol, look, all eyes are on the Gulf of Mexico once again here. I'll tell you what, I mean, just one massive hurricane after another. This one, Hurricane Milton, rapidly intensifying this morning, and it very well could be a Category 5 hurricane before the end of the day. It'll then track across the Gulf of Mexico, likely still being a major hurricane as it approaches the Florida Gulf Coast as we go Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. But notice, even though the center of the storm is near the Tampa Bay area, there's going to be a lot of rainfall that falls across the northern part of the state. Walk over here with me. I want to show you the forecast rainfall totals with this because, I mean, look, surge is the primary concern here, but rainfall is going to be significant with this hurricane as it moves across the Florida Peninsula. Some places could see, well, near the center of the storm could pick up more than a foot of rainfall, but even places up towards Jacksonville could see a lot of rainfall with this. I mentioned, though, the surge is a significant concern. Some places near the center and just south of the center of the storm could see up to 12 feet of storm surge as the storm moves across the Gulf of Mexico. Like I mentioned, rapidly intensifying this morning, Errol. It's now a Category 4. It could be a Category 5 before just slightly weakening as it approaches landfall Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. Back to you, Errol.
Yeah, hope it weakens quickly. Grant, thank you so much. Wake up with me tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. on CBS Morning News. CBS News 24/7 continues next, live from San Francisco.